Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on, where you are in this world. God bless you. This is Gloria White coming to you from Utah, USA. Warning, this is a very graphic chapter. And so if you have any small children, or if you are weak on your stomach, or if you fear hearing about this torturous death of these seven brothers, please skip this video. But we are continuing in the New Jerusalem Holy Bible. We are in 2nd Maccabees Chapter 7, the martyrdom of the seven brothers. It also happened that seven brothers were arrested with their mother. The king tried to force them to taste some pork, which the law forbids, by torturing them with whips and scourges. One of them, acting as a spokesman for the others, said, "What are you trying to find out from us? We are prepared to die rather than break the laws of our ancestors." The king, in a fury, ordered pans and cauldrons to be heated over a fire. As soon as these were red hot, he commanded that their spokesman should have his tongue cut out, his head scalped, and his extremities cut off, while the other brothers and his mother looked on. When he had been rendered completely helpless, the king gave orders for him to be brought, still breathing, to the fire and fried alive in a pan. As the smoke from the pan drifted about, his mother and the rest encouraged one another to die nobly, with such words as these: "The Lord God is watching and certainly feels sorry for us," as Moses declared in his song, which clearly states that he will take pity on his servants. When the first had left the world in this way, they brought the second forward to be tortured. After stripping the skin from his head, hair and all, they asked him, "Will you eat some pork before your body is tortured limb by limb?" Replying in his ancestral tongue, he said, "No," so he too was put to the torture in his turn. With his last breath he exclaimed, "Cruel brute, you may discharge us from this present life, but the King of the world will raise us up again, since we die for his laws, to live again forever." After him, they tortured the third, who on being asked for his tongue promptly thrust it out and boldly held out his hands, courageously saying, "Heaven gave me these limbs. For the sake of his laws I have no concern for them. For him I hope to receive them again from him." The king and his attendants were astounded at the young man's courage and his utter indifference to suffering. When this one was dead, they subjected the fourth to the same torments and tortures. When he neared the end of when he neared his end, he cried, "Ours is the better choice, to meet death at men's hands, than yet relying on God's promise that we shall be raised up by him, whereas for you there will be no resurrection to new life." Next they brought forth the fifth and began torturing him. But he looked at the king and said, "You have power over human beings, mortal as you are, and can act as you please. But do not think that our race has been deserted by God. Only wait, and you will see in your turn how his mighty power will torment you and your descendants." After him they led out the sixth, and his dying words were these: "Do not delude yourself. We are suffering like this through our own fault, having sinned against our own God. Hence, appalling things have befallen us. But do not think you yourself will go unpunished for attempting to make war on God." But the mother was especially admirable and worthy of honorable remembrance, for she watched the death of 7 sons in the course of a single day, and bravely endured it because of her hopes in the Lord. Indeed, she encouraged each of them in their ancestral tongue, filled with noble conviction. She reinforced her womanly argument with manly courage, saying to them, I do not know how you appeared in my womb. It was not I who endowed you with breath and life. I had not the shaping of your every part. And hence, the Creator of the world, who made everything and ordained the origin of all things, will in his mercy give you back breath and life, since for the sake of his laws you have no concern for yourselves. Antioch thought he was being ridiculed, suspecting insult in the tone of her voice, and as the youngest was still alive, he appealed to him, not with mere words, but with promises, on an oath to make him both rich and happy, if he would abandon the traditions of his ancestors. He would make him his friend and entrust him with public office. The young man took no notice at all, and so the king then appealed to the mother, urging her to advise the youth to save his life. After a great deal of urging on his part, she agreed to try persuasion on her son. Bending over him, she fooled the cruel tyrant with these words, uttered in her ancestral tongue: My son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb, and suckled you 3 years, fed you and reared you to the age you are now, and provided for you. I implore you, my child, look at the earth and sky and everything in them, and consider how God made them out of what did not exist, and that human beings come into being in the same way. Do not fear this executioner, but prove yourself worthy of your brothers, and accept death, so that I may receive you back with them in the day of mercy. She had hardly finished when the young man said, What are you all waiting for? I will not comply with the king's ordinance. I obey the ordinance of the law given to our ancestors through Moses. As for you, who have contrived every kind of evil against the Hebrews, you will certainly not escape the hands of God. We are suffering for our own sins, and if, to punish and discipline us, our living God is briefly angry with us, he will be reconciled with us in due course. But you, unholy wretch, and wickedness of the villains, what cause have you for pride, nourishing vain hopes and raising your hand against his servants? For you have not yet escaped the judgment of God the Almighty, the All-Seeing. Our brothers have endured brief pain for the sake of ever-flowing life, have died for the covenant of God, while you, by God's judgment, will have to pay the just penalty for your arrogance. I, too, like my brothers, surrender my body and life for the laws of my ancestors, begging God quickly to take pity on our nation, and by trials and afflictions to bring you to confess that he alone is God, so that with my brethren and myself there may be an end to the wrath of the Almighty, rightly loose on our whole nation. The king fell into a rage and treated this one more cruelly than the others, for he was himself smarting from the young man's scorn. And so the last brother met his end, undefiled and with perfect trust in the Lord. The mother was the last to die, after her sons. But let this be sufficient account of the ritual meals and monstrous tortures. Section 5. The Victory of Judaism. the death of the persecutor and purification of the temple. Judas Maccabeus and the resistance. Judas, otherwise known as Maccabeus, and his companions made their way secretly among the villages, rallying their fellow countrymen. They recruited those who remained loyal to Judaism and assembled about 6,000. They called on the Lord to have regard for the people oppressed on all sides, to take pity on the temple profaned by the godless, to have mercy on the city now being destroyed and leveled to the ground, to hear the blood of the victims that cried aloud to him, to remember, too, the criminal slaughter of innocent babies, and to avenge the blasphemies perpetrated against his name. As soon as Maccabeus had an organized force, he at once proved invincible to the foreigners, the Lord's anger having turned into compassion. Making surprise attacks on towns and villages, he fired them. He captured favorable positions and inflicted very heavy losses on the enemy, generally availing himself of the cover of night for such enterprises. The fame of his valor spread far and wide. Campaign of Nicanor and Gorgias. When Philip saw Judas was making steady progress and winning more and more frequent successes, he wrote to Ptolemy, the general officer commanding Coele-Syria and Phoenicia, asking for reinforcements in the royal interest. Ptolemy chose Nicanor, son of Patroclus, one of the king's first friends, and sent him without delay at the head of an international force of at least 20,000 men to exterminate the entire Jewish race. And his associate he appointed Gorgias, a professional general of wide military experience. Nicanor, for his part, proposed, by the sale of Jewish prisoners of war, to raise 2,000 talents of tribute money owed by the king to the Romans. He lost no time in sending the seaboard towns an invitation to come and buy Jewish manpower, promising delivery of 90 head for 1 talent. But he did not reckon on the judgment from the Almighty that was soon to overtake him. When news reached Judas of Nicanor's advance, he warned his men of the enemy's approach, whereupon the cowardly ones and those who lacked confidence in the justice of God took to their heels and ran away. The rest sold all their remaining possessions at the same time, praying the Lord to deliver them from the godless Nicanor, who had sold them even in advance of any encounter, if not for their own sakes, then at least out of consideration for the covenants made with their ancestors, and because they themselves bore his sacred and majestic name. Maccabeus marshaled his men, who numbered about 6,000, and exhorted them not to be dismayed at the enemy, or discouraged at the vast horde of Gentiles wickedly advancing against them, but to fight bravely, keeping before their eyes the outrage committed by them against the holy place, and the infamous and scornful treatment inflicted on the city, not to mention the destruction of their traditional way of life. They may put their trust in their weapons and their exploits, he said, but our confidence is in Almighty God, who is able with a single nod to overthrow both those marching on us and the whole world with them. He reminded them of the occasions on which their ancestors had received help, that time when, under Sennacherib, 185,000 men had perished, that time in Babylonia, when in the battle with the Galatians the Jewish combatants numbered only 8,000, with 4,000 Macedonians Yet, when the Macedonians were hard pressed, the 8,000 had destroyed 120,000, thanks to the help they had received from heaven, and had taken great booty as a result. Having so routed their courage by these words, that they were ready to die for the laws and their country, he then divided his army into four, putting his brothers Simon, Joseph, and Jonathan in command of one division each, and assigning them 1,500 men apiece. Next he ordered Esdras to read the holy book aloud and give them their watchword, help from God. Then, putting himself at the head of the first division, he attacked Nicanor. With the Almighty for their ally, they slaughtered over 9,000 of the enemy, wounded and crippled the greater part of Nicanor's army, and put them all to flight. The money of their prospective purchasers fell into their hands. After pursuing them for a good while, they turned back. Since time was pressing, it was the eve of the Sabbath, and for that reason they did not prolong their pursuit. They collected the enemy's weapons and stripped them of their spoils, and because of the Sabbath, even more heartily more heartily blessed and praised the Lord, who had saved them, and who had chosen that day for the first manifestation of his compassion. When the Sabbath was over, they distributed some of the booty among the victims of the persecution and the widows and orphans. The rest they divided among themselves and their children. They then joined in public supplication, imploring the merciful Lord to be fully reconciled with his servants. Let me see. We're at 16 minutes, I think. 17 minutes. Okay, well, we will stop there. So that puts us in chapter 8 and verse 29. And we'll start in chapter 8, verse 30 tomorrow, God willing. And as always, I love you. And I just want to say that it's quite admirable the way that the brothers died and the mother. They never turned their back on God. Even though at that time God was punishing them for their disobedience, for their sins. But now it seems that God has turned back to his people, and having compassion on them is giving them the victory. God never turns his back on his people, even when he's correcting us for our wrongdoings. It's because he loves us. Never forget that. And as always, I love you.